But I want to start by thanking Craig Kelly, because this man has stood up against all kinds of rubbish. He has told the truth, but he's researched it, as you can see. Craig Kelly, you display strength of character, which to me means integrity, honesty and courage. And you do it time and time again, and I thank you for this. Now, I am fiercely pro-human, and I have good reasons for that, because I look at the facts, as Craig just showed. I look beyond the electricity market, and I look at the behaviour of most of the people I know. I know everyone in this room cares, don't we? Everyone. Yeah. I also saw in my mother and father people who really cared, and they instilled in me a positive approach to humans. It's justified. And I had the good fortune to be living in the United States when Ronald Reagan took over as president. And he picked that whole country up with a vision and with strength of character and a determination to see it through. Think of this as what's happened in the last 170 years. Lifespans increased dramatically. Health, ease, comfort, security from famine. Famine? We don't have them anymore in the civilized world. Material wealth, choices. We all have coal-powered slaves in our living rooms, in our kitchens, in our factories, in our homes, right throughout. And we have mobility that was unheard of just 100 years ago. People on welfare in this country today are living easier and better lives than kings did 200 years ago. Fact. So what's our vision for Australia? Think about it. We want a self-reliant, I wrote these notes down, we want a self-reliant, independent and vigorous nation with Judeo-Christian values, proud of its heritage and working for a solid future, don't we? Yes. We want a nation in which people are proud of Western civilization and its many material, social and personal benefits and freedoms, and tolerant of all races, all people who assimilate and integrate, don't we? And we want a nation in which people invest freely and confidently to create wealth for ourselves and for all Australians across our whole nation. Early last century, our country had the world's highest per capita standard of living, the highest per capita GDP. Now, in my experience, I put together 8 different steps or factors for human progress. These are the steps. First of all, freedom, because it is this and this that creates everything. The second is rule of law, so that what Craig creates, Craig keeps and shares if he wants to. Third one is stable constitutional governance to perpetuate the rule of law. The fourth is secure property rights, private property rights, fundamental to responsibility and creativity and freedom. And I'll come back to that in the middle of my talk. The fifth one is fair, honest and efficient taxation. The sixth is honest money, honest currency. The seventh is strong, secure families, fundamental. And the eighth is secure, reliable, affordable, accessible energy. Because it's the last one that has driven the material gains right across our whole Western civilization. And until 1923, our country had all of these 8 steps improving in the right direction. And in 1923, it started reversing. And in 1944, with the advent of the UN, it started really declining. And I'll go through that in a minute. What I want to talk about is the fact that these 8 steps, these 8 factors necessary for human progress, are all heading in the wrong direction because of one thing: atrocious governance in this country. The key to ever decreasing prices, ever increasing productivity, is cheap energy. Now, energy, if you look at the costs per energy unit, over the last 170 years has done that. Until the last 10 years, when it's doubled. Human progress due to energy prices decreasing, human progress going backwards. Think about this, please. Just 20 years ago, we had a really solid market for electricity in this country. It was run in accordance with our Constitution. Our Constitution was set up wisely based on competitive federalism. In every state, there was one person responsible for the price of electricity. That was a government minister. And it was set up that way because electricity is an essential service. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands. So we set it up with one person responsible. And that person, male or female, Minister for Energy, had one responsibility: to drive down the price of electricity. See that, can't you? Because what happens is, if one state ends up with higher electricity prices, people move out of that state, industries move out of that state, business moves, employment moves to other states. That's fact, and it's fundamental, and it happened. Competitive federalism. Remember those terms. So the focus was on driving down prices and reliability. Now, John Howard. I wrote John Howard many letters, but I wrote two in particular. One in 2007 to thank him for his 30 years of service to the country. He really drove the agenda from Fraser, through Hawke, through Keating, to his own prime ministership. And then I started doing some research, not on him and his government, but on what had been happening across our country. And I found something that actually horrified me. It startled me. It moved me so much after reviewing the facts that I wrote him a second letter in 2014, rescinding my first letter. He has smashed this country, and I'll explain how. He had an unholy trifecta. Oh, before I should mention that, I should mention something else. In 2013, 6 years after he left the office, he gave a lecture in London. And in that lecture, he said, "I'm agnostic on climate science." That means that John Howard said he doesn't know which way the climate science points. There was no reason for doing what he did, but here's what he did. First of all, he put in the first carbon tax of any major party in this country. And he put it in to come into place in 2012. Fact. Number two, he brought in the renewable energy target. Last year, he stood up and said the renewable energy target is destroying the country. It's ridiculous. He put it in. Third, he stole farmers' property rights right across this country. There is nothing more sacrosanct to a true liberal than secure private property rights, correct? It's the die in the trenches deal. John Howard, to comply with the UN's Kyoto Protocol from 1996, went out and did a deal with Rob Borbidge, the National Party Premier of Queensland. John Anderson, the National Party Deputy Prime Minister of Australia and the equivalent in Queensland. National Liberal Party did the deal. 1996, continued 1997. And the deal was to steal farmers' property rights by preventing the clearing of native vegetation. How? Well, here's how it works. John Howard, to comply with the UN's Kyoto Protocol, he said we wouldn't sign it, but he did say repeatedly we would comply with it. To comply with that meant either shutting down industry, which there was no political appetite to do, or stopping the clearing of land that would have been cleared, because those trees, those shrubs, take up the carbon dioxide. He had another problem though. Under Section 51, Clause 31 of our Constitution, anybody from the federal government that takes private property rights, interferes with them, must pay just terms compensation. So the Commonwealth government would have been up for tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars. So what's the solution that John Howard took? He continued the deal with Borbidge, and then when Beattie took over in Queensland Premier, ramped it up, spent hundreds of millions of our dollars, gave it to Queensland, no conditions attached, to just use as they want, providing they brought in strict clearing legislation. Same in New South Wales. Bob Carr's admitted it. I've seen the correspondence between Beattie and Howard. That's what he did. Yet he was agnostic on the climate science. No reason for doing it. Now, there are four main factors driving up the price of electricity. The other speakers have already covered them. The first one is the renewable energy target going up. The second one is gold plating of the networks. The third one is guaranteed retail margins, up around 26%. The fourth one is the national electricity market. It is really a racket. It is so convoluted, so screwed up, that bureaucrats control it. It's not a market, it is a racket. And under this system, as Craig knows better probably than any other member of Parliament, they game the system to drive up their own prices. And who pays? And how much do we pay? Thousands of dollars. This is nonsense, as Craig kept saying. We also have the intermittent energy having major impacts on our stability of our network. Decreases in reliability, decreases in security, increases in price. Driving unemployment, driving jobs overseas, and raising the prices of goods in this country. We have vested interest taking our money to generate higher priced electricity. We have people like Greg Combet, who in 2007, as Secretary of the ACTU, was a director on the board of directors of an industry superannuation fund that at the time owned the largest wind farm producer in this country, wind farm electricity producer in this country. Just a few years later, as Federal Minister for Energy, Greg Combet shoveled tens of millions of dollars of our money into Pacific Hydro and other wind farm companies. Is that a conflict of interest?
Yes. Indeed.
And Penny Wong, I've seen it in correspondence because I held people in the ALP accountable. I saw a letter from Mark Ferner, who was then a Senator for Queensland, to Penny Wong, and Penny Wong's reply. I initiated it because I held Mark Ferner accountable. He was my senator. Penny Wong's reply had many misrepresentations in it. Serious misrepresentations. So this saw a gutless John Howard not willing to take on Kevin Rudd with facts, even though he was agnostic, and Kevin Rudd telling lies. And I'll give you an example of one of the lies Kevin Rudd told. In 2007, he said 4,000 scientists are running around the country in white lab coats saying that this needs to be done. The actual IPCC report in 2007 had one chapter claiming warming attributed to our carbon dioxide. One, chapter 9. It was reviewed by around about 63 people. 5 academics confirmed that claim. 5 endorsed it. 5. Not 4,000. There is no science anywhere on this planet that shows we need to cut our carbon dioxide. Craig Kelly is absolutely correct. We now have lunacy. We've had 7 leaders of the 2 failed old parties turfed out because of this issue. We now have Snowy 2 on the books at a cost of around, when you look at all the things that have to be done, $12.5 billion. It will actually increase the carbon intensity, and I'll be happy to answer questions and explain why. Craig knows. It'll increase the price, and the Snowy 2 scheme is actually, the fact that it was put forward by Craig's party indicates a failure of the national electricity market. And even if we build a coal-fired power station, how can you run it when it's going to be based on intermittent availability because of the intermittent energies? We have to scrap the RET. This has been done for the UN's Kyoto Protocol, the UN's Paris Agreement, and the UN's 1992 Rio Declaration. They're the main things. But there's one fifth one I want you to think about. We have privatised a sector. Now, I was all in favour of private ownership of most assets. I am no longer of that case, because we can't have a monopoly held over us by any private sector, much less a Chinese one, much less a communist Chinese one. Our state has some of the best coal in the world, clean, cheap. Our state government, so some of the electricity sectors have been privatised, sold to private companies. Some have been corporatised. So the governments have set up, as the case in Queensland is, where we own the generators, the public owns the generators, have corporatised the generators. So the generators are overseen by a board. Now, board is responsible for the profit. So what is the focus of the people in the electricity sector these days, whether it's private company or corporatised government entity? Profit. How do you maximise profit? Put up the price. Can you see what's happened? Competitive federalism under our Constitution focused on driving down the price. And we had, as Craig said, the cheapest electricity in the world. Now we have a focus on driving up the price. And where do we have our electricity? Amongst the highest. No one has talked about that, ever. But I'm not a genius, but it's common sense. What we're doing is handing over our governance and our sovereignty to the UN. We have changed our competitive federalism and brought in a focus on driving up the price of electricity. And we have now replaced competitive federalism with competitive welfareism. South Australia can do all of its crazy tricks, drive up the price of electricity, and be bailed out by Western Australia. Tasmania, Victoria can do stupid things because they'll be bailed out by the generosity of South Australia under the GST. This is insane. So I want to move to something that Craig touched on, and that's the climate science. As a senator, actually before going into the Senate, I spent 8 years voluntarily chasing up people, agencies in Australia and overseas claiming that we're affecting the climate. No one provided me with any evidence. No member of parliament, no agency. Tim Ball says, he's the world's best climatologist, he says that I'm the only person ever to have done that. When I was in the Senate, that's the first thing I did. I chased up the CSIRO. I'm the only member of parliament anywhere to have done that. Now, what does that tell you about governance? There isn't any. We held the CSIRO accountable. We had 3 presentations from the CSIRO. We also had a presentation from the chief scientist, Alan Finkel. We were sitting in his office along with Senator Sinodinos, the Minister for Science, and they gave us the usual crap. And after 20 minutes, they realised that our questions were sensible. We weren't the hillbillies from Queensland. We'd done our homework. And Alan Finkel looked at me across the table, closer than this, and said, I'm not a climate scientist and I don't understand the climate science. But look at the presentations that man's made. So I said, we want a proper presentation, a long one, at least 4 hours, and a proper discussion. He said, yes. Senator Sinodinos, the Minister for Science, agreed. And he said to me, Chief Scientist said to me, can I bring a scientist? I said, you can bring anyone you want, because there is no evidence. At the next meeting that was arranged, he was replaced by the CSIRO. Now, in the course of 3 presentations from the CSIRO, here are some of the things we learnt. I'm not going to go into everything, just a couple of key ones. I said to them in their first presentation, what in the last 2,000 years climate record of Earth indicates anything dangerous and that we're causing it? And they said, we would never use the word danger. We didn't use the word danger. We would never say that. Well, who did? You better ask the ministers. The next thing, in the second presentation, they said, we asked a longer question. We said, what in the last 10,000 years climate record has been unprecedented? They tried to tell us it was temperature, recent temperatures. They had one paper, Marcotte in 2013. What the hell did they rely on before that? We destroyed that paper in front of them. They then admitted that today's temperatures are not unprecedented. Did you hear me? Not unprecedented. What has this facade been built on? Global warming, unusual, dangerous global warming. I wrote letters before I went into the Senate to the CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology looking for freedom of information. I wanted all the correspondence from the CSIRO Chief Executive to members of Parliament and ministers. Do you know how many reports, letters on the topic of climate were sent by the CSIRO Chief Executive from the years 2008 to 2005 to 2013? Yes, Beverly wins the prize. 0. I asked the same for the Bureau of Meteorology. The Bureau of Meteorology had sent 17 documents. Most were just updates from the IPCC, which has never produced any information. That's the UN's climate body. And one 5-page report to the Foreign Minister at the time. No science anywhere. So where did the ministers get this nonsense from? Kevin Rudd, I've told you about. When I pointed out to him about the mistake in his 4,000, his office came back to me and we had correspondence, and I kept giving them the data. All of a sudden they fell silent. They knew there was no evidence because they couldn't rebut me. They were telling lies to the Australian people. Barnaby Joyce was the most colourful, most effective speaker against this climate scam. He was very, very effective. I went out to his electorate office in St George, drove 6 hours with a friend, and we were this far apart, having a cup of tea in his office, and he said, it's all based on corruption, there is no science, it's not necessary. When he entered the ministry, what happened? Now that he's out of the ministry, what's happening? He's starting to raise it a little at a time. So what we've seen is Labor Greens' deceitful lies, and we've seen gutlessness from the Liberal Party, with one exception. Right there. In 2009, there was a recession around the world after the global financial crisis. The production of carbon dioxide from human activity decreased. What happened to the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Continued increasing. Why? Because the science shows that we don't have any impact, and we can't have any impact. There's a simple explanation. I can give it to you for anyone who wants that later. Is this effective governance?
No.
With the main thing that's destroying our energy and creating energy poverty and unemployment, destroying our kids' future, being based on a Labor Greens lie and Liberal national gutlessness? That's not governance. That's handing over to the UN.
Exactly.
And how much is this costing you? Thousands of dollars a year. Government in this country is now simply a way of stealing. And it's transfer of wealth. And who's making out like bandits? Some academics who are paid to come up with the conclusions they come up with. Some people in vested interests like wind farm suppliers, solar panel providers, and many others. This is what I think we need to end this energy poverty. We need honest government with restored accountability. Accountability in Parliament is extremely low. We need economic security and reduced costs of living, starting with cheap energy. One of the 8 fundamentals to getting human progress. We need to be free of needless UN intrusion in our governance, our sovereignty, our way of life and our lives, so that Australians can get on with their lives. We need to understand that we are not harming our planet by burning hydrocarbon fuels. We are not. We are improving it. I'm happy to answer that question as to how hydrocarbon fuels are improving the environmental care we're establishing on this planet. We need leadership that is honest, competent, and serving the people. We need to be back on the road to human progress. So here's an invitation to every politician in this country. I invite you to show me where there is any empirical scientific evidence proving that our carbon dioxide from our activity affects global climate and needs to be cut. It is the onus is on both failed old parties to make sure they have that evidence before they've taken us through this last 20 years of nonsense. And until they provide that evidence, they need to get the hell out of the way and let other people run the country. In summary, I have 4 messages. We have a looming energy catastrophe due to atrocious governance. That is the core issue, below energy poverty, beneath energy poverty. Second message, there is no scientific evidence for a climate catastrophe due to our carbon dioxide, and that is supposed to be what underpins the energy poverty. Third one, until we recognise that governance is the core issue, we will continue falling for this crap. Who's the sovereign in this country? Who can change the constitution? Us. We're the sovereigns. We have to make the tired old parties pay at the ballot box. They have stuffed it up. Fourth, To restore effective governance, we need to stop our central parliament following the rules of unelected UN agencies and restore adherence to our constitution. It is that simple. We have the people, we have the resources, we have the opportunities, we have the potential. All this country needs to go back to this leading the world in gross domestic product per capita is leadership with a vision and with the guts to do the right thing. We can regain leadership and energy, human progress and governance simply by going back to our constitution and keeping the bastards honest at the ballot box. Thank you very much.